This episode is sponsored by Plan Checker. Across building control and the wider construction sector, one issue keeps coming up: capacity. The work is there, the responsibility is huge, and the pressure keeps increasing. Plan Checker was built to help bridge that gap by making it easier to access independent, appropriately qualified professionals when support is genuinely needed. Whether that's for plan reviews, consultancy input, or specialist advice. It doesn't change statutory responsibility, and it doesn't interfere with regulatory rules. It simply helps people find expertise without relying on informal networks or last-minute phone calls. If you want to see how that works in practice, visit planchecker.co.uk.
Welcome to Behind the Regs podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jon Cumberlidge and joined by my co-host, Nader. Jon is closely involved in national conversations around competence, regulation and reform in building control. Jon, if you'd like to give us a bit of a brief background on yourself and what you've been currently working on.
Yeah, super. So, hello. A brief history of me then. So, I started construction on site. So I was a labourer and a brickies hoddy, which I absolutely loved during the summer, and in the winter less so. So I kind of looked at my colleagues around me and thought, do I want to be kind of mid-50s, 60s working out in the cold? Maybe not. I had an opportunity to join Birmingham City Council, so joined Birmingham as a building control officer, as was the sort of title at the time. Within Birmingham, I moved to a commercial team, and that's where I got to work on some interesting stuff. So my sort of introduction into commercial buildings really was as a trainee inspector on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So £500 million new hospital with a helicopter landing pad. It's the only helicopter landing pad I've done in my career, and maybe the only helicopter landing pad I ever get to work on. But that was really interesting, really cool. Worked on the library build at Birmingham. So largest library in Western Europe was sort of the aspiration of that. Really interesting building architecturally and some really interesting fire safety features. So there's an oxygen reduction system in that building, which is great. So we visited Germany to look at some of the technology used on that building. The oxygen reduction system came from Germany. They bring a HGV essentially with a trailer in the back. You sit in the back of this trailer, you watch a video, and at the end of the video they say, right, you've been sat in a reduced oxygen environment for the past 20 minutes. Here's a cigarette lighter, try to set fire to something. And then you have a go and you can't. So that was good fun. So yeah, from the council, I then moved to an approved inspector, and eventually got around to setting up my own approved inspector. So currently where I'm at is I'm a building inspector. That's kind of first and foremost really being a registered building inspector, and I co-own a registered building control approver called C3. I also do a bit of fire consultancy as well, sort of separately to the building control stuff. So that's kind of my sort of career history, if you like. What I'm doing at the moment, or what I'm involved in, I guess interesting stuff, is the ICC, so the Industry Competency Committee and the building control working group specifically there. I do a bit of stuff for CABE. So I am a CBICAS assessor, so the building inspector sort of competency assessment scheme with CABE. I do a bit of teaching for CABE as well, so I deliver a couple of days on their certificate in building control, which is a great course, and I highly recommend that to people. And I guess I'm a co-founder in as much as many of these things start just a chat amongst a group of people, and then you kind of have a beer and it develops into something else, of the Association of Registered Building Inspectors. So that's kind of me in not so much of a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jon. So we've got a lot of different topics to discuss today. I think the first one we'll go for is the ITC. If you could give us a bit of an explanation as to why it was established, and what problem it was intended to address?
Okay, so I mean, the ICC, there are several layers to it, if you like. So there is a principal ICC, an Industry Competency Committee, and then there are subgroups to that. So I sit within the Building Control Working Group, but the ICC they're a statutory committee, so they're sort of established under the Building Safety Act. They sit within the BSR. They are, I think, a good way to describe it is a critical friend to the Building Safety Regulator. But what they're looking to do is sort of establish that group as an authoritative voice on competence for the construction industry. So that's the purpose of it.
Okay. How does the ICC interface with existing professional bodies and regulators without some duplicating roles?
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, I will speak to the the Building Control Working Group because that's what I know. So the purpose of it is to set expectations for the industry on competence, and clearly registered building inspectors have very clear expectations because we're a regulated profession. We have the big off. We have those standards to meet. Promoting sort of to the industry about competence as well. Assisting and advising the industry and advising the BSR. So BSR will come to the group with a hot topic of the month, if you like, and the group will provide some advice on that. But you asked the question about sort of how it aligns with existing sort of systems, if you like. So all three of the building inspector competence verification assessment pathways have representation on the group. So that's they are sort of part of those discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jon. Moving forward, competence in practice and obviously its impact on RBIs at the moment. From a practitioner's point of view or your own perspective, how should RBIs expect the competence agenda to influence their day-to-day work?
Yeah, I mean, competence is, I was going to say it's everything and nothing, isn't it? In terms of it should just be built into what we do. We've gone through the first, dare I say, gateway, if you like, of becoming registered, which I think is fair to say was a bit of a shock to the system for the industry. We've seen the results of that. We're sort of settled now, I guess, into business as usual, and I think we just need to be careful not to become too complacent because 2028 is the next date for re-registration. It sounds like it's a long way off, but it is now. It's all 2026. CAVE are starting their reassessment schemes mid-2027. We're only 18 months away, really. So whilst competence is part of it's interwoven into what we do. The CPD, and I think a lot of us do. We probably don't record half of the CPD that we actually do because we're always learning. Every day is a school day. The day you think you know it all is the day you really need to give up, really. But yeah, my message would be that we need to be preparing and thinking about how we structure for that re-registration in 2028.
Would you say that the current system now, like you're saying, you're pretty much business back as usual? Would you say that the system is moving in the right direction and like with the focus on obviously behaviors, judgment, and accountability? Or are we still overly focused on framework and evidence?
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff is a bit of an iterative process, isn't it? It will develop, it will change over time. I firmly believe that the stuff in the BIC-OFF, particularly around the ethics stuff, most of us were doing anyway. 99.9% of us were doing anyway. It was just a sort of a formalization of that process. So it will, it will mature. Other industries will start to come in line with it. And I think that's the big next step, isn't it, really, in terms of building control have, I think someone once said we were competence pioneers. We're the first to go through this process in construction, but everybody else is not far behind us. And we do, we have a role to keep ourselves competent, but also we play a huge role in terms of educating the rest of the industry. Their first, particularly small, contractors, their first interaction with, the building regulations, the Building Safety Act, will be that RBI who turns up on site. So we do have a responsibility, a duty to sort of educate the industry with those behavioural nudges, which is a phrase that I quite like.
You've said the word competence quite a few times. Obviously, it's the most common word being used around at the moment within the industry. So, what are your thoughts beyond assessment and registration? What does good competence actually look like?
Yeah, it can be quite ethereal, can't it? The word competence, and maybe a bit too easy to throw around. What does competence look like in practice? I think the most important piece of the competence piece for me, and I've said piece too many times and it feels a bit weird, is kind of knowing your limits, isn't it? The kind of building inspectors are not experts in absolutely everything. We're really, really good generalists, and we have certain expertise in certain fields. But it's knowing your limitations, where you need to lean on others. The role is very much about knowing what questions to ask. It's that Columbo moment. Jack, you're probably both far too young to remember that reference, so showing my age there. But yeah, it's that sort of that one last question, isn't it? That's our job, is to sort of scrutinise, to ask those questions, not necessarily have the answers, but sort of demand that response from the competent people that are ultimately responsible for the design, for the construction.
So basically, we're like GPs then, not special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen my GP Google my illness before, and there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody holds all of the approved documents in their head. It's impossible. You can't. I have my party trick is remembering British Standard numbers, but I'm convinced that in most meetings, as long as you say it with conviction, you can just make it up and they'll believe you. Clearly, that's not very ethical. So definitely don't do that. But my point is, you've got to know where to go, where your limits are, where to get that information. And that's the sort of, I think, the most important piece of that competence, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's knowing that time when to ask the right person the right question, rather than having a guess where you're not fully confident in it yourself.
Yeah, we're all on that journey. Nobody knew what does a class 3 RBI look like? What does a class 2 RBI look like? We had the framework there, but we didn't know what was out there in the industry. So we've gone through that first process now. It will change. It will mature. And that's a good thing.
So you mentioned the Building Control Working Group. How does that fit alongside the ICC, and what is the primary focus been so far for the Building Control Working Group?
So we are a building control working group. What I think is really, really good is, I'm on that group because a couple of places were advertised for registered building inspectors. So there wasn't any RBIs represented on the ICC Building Control Working Group, and they recognised that and saw that it was important to have people who practice on that group. So I went through that process, got onto it. There's another RBI on that group as well, which I think is really great, and we kind of need to recognise that it's a good thing that RBIs are involved now, people doing the job. I think there's a potential, there's a thought, isn't there, that we've had a lot done to us from higher up without necessarily the involvement of those people, boots on the ground at the coalface, doing the job. So that's really good. So we meet quite regularly. We have sort of a fixed things we talk about, such as building inspector numbers and those sorts of things, and we can all interrogate the register and see how many people out there and that sort of thing. We all recognise that going forward, we have been a aging profession for quite a long time. So bringing through new people, making building control an attractive industry that people want to come into as well. So we look at those common themes. Previously the ICC, before my time, produced a guidance note on design advice and building control advice, so that kind of where does the line sit between giving that compliance advice that we talk about versus design advice. One of the topics we're currently working on is about supervision. So potentially looking at some guidance to come out of the ICC around the supervision piece, which I think we're doing as a profession already. We were required to have those things in place for the code of conduct. So we're doing it, but I think it'd be nice to have something out there that maybe creates a little bit of consistency and a bit of reassurance across the piece as well.
Do you think there's a risk that professionals struggle to understand where responsibilities sit between different groups and initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a risk of watering down the message, isn't there, with too many parties, I guess. I think that's the issue or the challenge, shall I say, with construction. We've been regulated based on how the nuclear industry or chemical industry were regulated as an example. Construction is very diverse. A lot of the companies that exist are micro businesses as well. There are thousands and thousands of actors within that, and within that, there's a lot of interested parties, with their own agendas as well. So it's trying to cut through all of that with a sort of common theme, isn't it? So, and kind of, okay, we've been through our process with our very clear, we've got the BIC-off, which is structured in terms of the competence we should have. We've got an assessment scheme, dare I say, principal designers for building regulations, principal contractors. There's various schemes that are out there that have been sort of developed in line with the PASs. But again, that's a developing process, isn't it?
Yeah. So with the Building Control Working Group, what sort of progress has been made to date with that group? Is there any sort of examples you could give, or?
That's a difficult question, because I'm not allowed to talk about a lot of stuff. So I've been given a briefing note of what I'm allowed to say. Not necessarily what I'm not allowed to say, but I have a habit of putting my foot in my mouth. But yeah, so some of the if you'll have been well aware of some of the sort of key issues that have popped up around building control. And particularly around maybe some of the MDT stuff, and supervision is a good example as well. So all of those topics, we've spoken about. As I say, they're sort of trying to develop guidance out there.
Thank you, Jon. We're not going to put any more difficult questions for not in line with the briefing note. So,
no, I mean, if you want to interrogate me further, I'm not going to break.
No, not our intention at all. Not our intention. Pressure, pace, and professional judgment. Right now, there's there's growing concerns about the pace and volume of change from what's happening around us and obviously what's been happening in the last 2 to 3 years, I would say. From what you see, is the system placing too much pressure on RBIs too quickly?
Yeah, I went on a managing stress at work course a couple of weeks ago at HSE over in the Peak District. Absolute gorgeous location, and it was interesting. So the HSE have kind of these 6 stresses that they talk about. So they talk about sort of demand, control, support, relationships, role, and change. And we were sitting there talking about the workplace, and it was quite a diverse room that we were in. And then I thought about our industry really in terms of the stresses, demand. There are less building inspectors than there were before. We've got mandatory things we need to do. We have code of conduct. So the demands on us are huge. The control element, we've had little control over what's happened to us. We've been told this is what you need to go and do, and these are the dates that you need to go and do it. Support, we haven't necessarily had our hands held throughout the process. The role, what is an RBI? That's a really important discussion that we need to have. But I think there's some maybe, we need some clarity around that stuff, and change, the pace of change, the amount of things that have changed. The Building Safety Act is the biggest piece of legislation since the Second World War. It's huge, not just us, but across the piece. So the scale of change, and it's not finished yet. Things are still changing. So I just sat there and kind of went, well, actually, I'm not surprised that RBIs are a bit fatigued. We've been under a lot of pressure. Pressure's good. That point of right, we've got to step up to the mark now as a profession, and I think it's a great thing that we're a regulated profession. The potential for respect that brings within the industry and the standing of RBIs, I think, is absolutely fantastic. But I do not think we should underestimate the amount of pressure that we have been under as building inspectors. And I guess part of trying to resolve that sort of thing, we're not going to solve the demand overnight. There's a lot of work to be done. There are a finite amount of us. We're not going to solve a lot of those issues. I think solving the role, or at least getting some clarity around the role, would help. The support piece is interesting. Kind of how can we, as a profession, both public and private sector, so how can we support one another? How can we work more collaboratively with one another? I think will be a really important thing for us to sort of work on, really. But there's no doubt it's been I've definitely got more grey hair now than I had before I started my
We all do, to be fair,
process.
John. We all do. Following up, you've mentioned a lot about support. I'd want to touch also on protect. So how do we protect professional judgment while also increasing oversight and accountability?
I think that's exercising professional judgment's a really interesting one, isn't it? Particularly when we come back to the to supervision and design advice. Let's stick with those. So what are you allowed to exercise your judgment on? You've been assessed as being competent. You're on a register of building inspectors. My personal view, and not that of necessarily the ICC or of anyone else really, is that you should be able to exercise your professional judgment within those sort of guidelines. But we're building inspectors. We know the law. We're also very technical. Yes, it is the responsibility of the designers, the contractors, etc. But it's really important that we kind of rebuild some confidence. Maybe I think a lot of people have had their confidence knocked in terms of what decisions they can make and they can't make. And it's essential that, in making those decisions, we're recording, we're evidencing how we've made those decisions, how we've reached a conclusion. There's definitely this is a discussion, I guess, around kind of negligence. It might not be the optimal decision. It might not be what the book says. But if you follow a logical process, you record how you've done that, then you can't really be negligent in that process. So that's really important, those records and those sorts of things. And I'll be absolutely honest with you, I've forgotten what your question was.
No, so it sort of answered the question, but and I'll follow and elaborate more maybe on the next question. The first question was, how do we protect professional judgment while also increasing oversight and accountability? And is there a danger that fear of scrutiny leads to risk-averse decision-making?
There we go. Yes. So, and I think that's where I was going when I was talking about kind of trying to restore confidence. We are, as RBIs, we can be sanctioned. You can be fined, you can be struck off. And I think that has created some reluctance. The industry has clearly relied too much on building control in the past for everything. However, to turn that off overnight is really difficult. To expect the construction industry to suddenly have all the answers themselves is really difficult. So my belief is we do what we always did. We weren't out there designing things, or we certainly shouldn't have been. But we are the experts in how all these bits fit together, aren't we? We've sort of got that overview. We work across a lot of projects, so we have that experience, and we've got to be able to bring that to bear on projects. And that's the tightrope of design advice and compliance advice. But as I say, it's about asking the questions. It's about saying, are you sure? That procedural nudge in the right direction. And not being having the confidence to do that without the fear of scrutiny.
Yeah. I think,
and I just go back to that, recording that evidence that you have, recording that process that you go through. That's really important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jon.
There's been a number of publications that have come out over, well, yesterday we had the Single Construction Regulator, which has been published. Obviously, I don't think you've had much time to sort of digest all the information within. But in your opinion, what problems are the government trying to solve with this proposal then?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday was quite a busy day, wasn't it, for MHCLG? So we had the Single Construction Regulator. So essentially, there was an update to progress on the Grenfell inquiry. So we had the Single Construction Regulator. We had the sort of review of HRBs, high risk buildings. Is that definition still appropriate, or should it change? And we had some stuff around sort of regulation of the fire engineering industry. So Merry Christmas. Here's some stuff for you to go and read. The Single Construction Regulator is an interesting one. So you're right, I haven't read it in full, but it talks about the building ecosystem. So again, construction is really complex, isn't it? It's about factories and products being manufactured. It's about the design piece. It's about the construction piece. It's then about the inoccupation phase as well, and the FM and the maintenance of buildings and everything else. So it's quite a diverse range. At the moment, we have sort of not silos, but we have various departments looking after different things. So fire sat in the Home Office as an example. Products, testing of products and those sorts of things, that sat in the Office of Products Safety and Standards. The BSR itself, the HSE, sits under the Department for Work and Pensions. So there's sort of an aim to sort of try and centralise that stuff. and that to be done through a non-governmental or a non-departmental government body, so sort of an arm's length, if you like, single construction regulator. I think it's a really good thing, that sort of joined up approach to it. So there's a consultation that's out at the minute, but that this is different to the discussion around a national regulator for building control. So that was we talk about change and other stuff to happen. The Building Control Independent Panel, so the ICIP, that Dame Judith Hackett has chaired. So they were looking at kind of two questions principally around commercial interest in building control and about whether it should be delivered by a national body. And that report we will get hopefully sometime soon. So there's more stuff. So this isn't about that. This isn't about sort of a national building control regulator. This is about the wider construction piece. The government have got an interim construction advisor in place. I think the message is that we're not finished. There were a number of recommendations out of the inquiry, and the government are moving through each of those to take forward. So this is this is years in the making. 2017, summer of 2017 was Grenfell. We're quite a way on from that. We've come a long way, but we're not there yet. And it's going to be quite interesting to see how this matures over time. In 10 years' time, I'm sure we'll all look back and think, it was a really good thing and we've got to a good place.
So this episode is sponsored by Plan Checker. Across building control and the wider construction sector, one issue keeps coming up: capacity. The work is there, the responsibility is huge, and the pressure keeps increasing. Plan Checker was built to help bridge that gap by making it easier to access independent, appropriately qualified professionals when support is genuinely needed. Whether that's for plan reviews, consultancy input, or specialist advice. It doesn't change statutory responsibility, and it doesn't interfere with regulatory rules. It simply helps people find expertise without relying on informal networks or last-minute phone calls. If you want to see how that works in practice, visit planchecker.co.uk.
So what you have seen from the prospectus, obviously you've a brief amount of time to sort of review it with a couple of them coming out at once. In respect of the prospectus, do you feel like it does reflect the intent of the Grenfell Phase 2 recommendations, and that is what's sort of being pushed forward on it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about, I think there was a quote in there from the Building Safety Minister, around building safety being non-negotiable. So that's the primary function, isn't it? But aside from building safety, it talks about quality. It talks about creating an environment where responsible individuals and companies can thrive as well. The political agenda has building one or two houses on it. So that is an aim as well. So we need to create an environment where that can happen, and there's lots of pieces, and we are, as building inspectors, just part of that jigsaw.
The impact on building control and local delivery. What could a single regulator mean for building control delivery on the ground, particularly within local authorities?
So this, the construction regulator piece is very different. So if you're sort of talking there more about, Dame Judith Hackett's BCIP work, what would a national regulator look like? I wouldn't want to comment, as I don't foresee that being the way that we are going to go with a national regulator. We have a regulator as a profession in the BSR, and that's about regulating individuals, regulating companies, and regulating local authorities against the same standards, which is great. That level playing field that we've spoken around for quite some time. So bringing us all up to the same standards, really good.
I think they spoke about some people early predictions, thinking that that single regulator, construction regulator, so to be specific, may have a risk on local expertise and practical experience getting diluted in a more centralized model. Do you think there is a risk there that this would happen?
Don't know is my answer to that.
Fair enough.
Having a drawing all of those bits together allows better communication, doesn't it? It allows for the criticism of construction is that we sort of work in silos, don't we? And the assumption is that somebody else is doing something, or that's not my job, that's theirs. So pulling all of these pieces together, that whole journey through like products, designing, building, management of the in-occupation phase into one place certainly helps us to sort of be more joined up with that. The other piece is about future risk, isn't it? So that sort of horizon scanning that goes on in terms of rather than waiting for a disaster to happen and then changing regulation and tightening up and trying to fix things, actually looking forward and trying to be proactive about that. And yes, we have a history of fixing, bolting the stable door after the horse is bolted, that sort of thing. That's part of that role as well, and part of BSR's role. The data collection is about where are the emerging risks in the future, and there's just from the fire world at the moment, we're talking about PV panels on buildings, we're talking about electric vehicles and batteries and those sort of things. The world and construction, technology evolves much quicker than the guidance does, and that's the really important part around for building inspectors. The functional requirements don't change. Just because there isn't something in an approved document to cover off, an EV fire or something like that, doesn't mean it's not a relevant consideration. So that's where that's where the gold is. That's where we kind of ask the question of those competent designers, those competent contractors, and we sort of get them thinking about those things so they can sort of provide the solutions that give the right outcomes, I think would be the political thing to say.
The next question is an easy one, and I think that the answer to that may just be one word, yes or no. How important is it that any new regulator genuinely understands how building control operates day to day? Because obviously sometimes we see that, not sometimes, actually at the moment, that the regulator is headed by maybe an individual that is not involved in the building control day-to-day operations, or haven't been. So how important is that in any new regulator, that they understand how building control operates day to day?
Yes, is my answer. No, sorry, I'll elaborate on that. No, it is vitally important. There's two pieces of that, isn't there? One of them is just you've got to bring the industry with you. The guys and girls that are out there delivering this. We provide a really valuable public service. Whether you work in private sector or public sector, we're delivering public safety and public service. And Jack, in a previous podcast, I think mentioned about the kind of people that get into building control. We do this job because we're incredibly sad and we love it, and we kind of, it's a fulfilling job. We do make a difference. We do keep people safe. So you need to bring the practitioners, the professionals in along on that journey. Absolutely. There have been I don't want to be overly critical, but there have been wrinkles where the practicalities of doing the job haven't necessarily been properly understood. And it's great that, there are 2 registered building inspectors now that sit on the ICC working group. I've been involved in meetings with MHCLG, with a group of other building inspectors, talking about potential future changes and various bits and pieces. So I think that's really positive, and it has been recognised that the value that we bring. There are, it's difficult not to get a little bit of fatigue about the amount of consultations out there, but they affect all of us. So it's really important that we still try and engage with this stuff as individuals, and through organisations that represent us as well.
When we spoke about some of the new publications that have come out, there's a specific one regarding fire engineering as well, which, again, you may not have had a lot of time to digest all the information, but what do you foresee the future of being a fire engineer? How do you think that is now going to be changing for that profession?
Yeah, indeed. So again, one of the Grenfell inquiry recommendations was about sort of professionalisation or regularisation of the fire engineering profession. The first complicated bit on that is, what is a fire engineer? So that's the sort of first question to be answered. But yeah, there was a policy paper that came out. So there is a panel that's been looking at various bits and pieces. There's some good stuff in there around, engaging with academic institutions in order to deliver that education piece of fire engineering. And I think the 2 bits that really struck me was, the regulation. So very similar to we have done with building control, so making fire engineered a protected title. And then about the preparation of a fire safety strategy being a protected function, maybe like we have, restricted activities and functions of a fire engineer. So those are really good things. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the building control process. Dare I say, we need to be careful not to repeat the potential unintended consequences of reducing capacity. And also, I do have slight concern for if there are restricted resource in the building inspector world, and you now have regulated professionals delivering protected functions. Perhaps building control may be tempted to give less scrutiny to that. And I think it's really important that we're still able to, hold people to account, to scrutinise, to inspect properly, and not to let whether it's a real or perceived lack of resource kind of drive what building inspectors do. So it looks like fire engineers will go through a similar process as building inspectors.
So that could look like a register, code of conduct. Obviously, we have the BIC off as well. They'd have you can imagine they'll have their own one as well, which, it in practicalities, it sounds like it could be a good move to have competence assessed as well. However,
and I think this is where we're going with everyone, isn't it? Across the piece, at some point, everyone involved in construction will have to be able to demonstrate their competence. But a really good thing for fire engineers. You can call yourself a fire engineer if you maintain fire extinguishers. That's the issue, is kind of what is a fire engineer. And it is quite a diverse a diverse practice. Some people are experts in CFD, and various things like that. So there are niches within niches, as there are in building inspectors. So I would expect them to have some sort of tiered, or some sort of I wouldn't necessarily say aligned to the classes of building inspectors, but there are simple and there are complex things, and some sort of assessment there. So that's a good thing. But that's where we're moving. We're moving towards everyone having assessed, verified, competence.
Yeah, which I think definitely is good for the industry. Obviously, we don't want a mass exodus, which appeared to happen when the whole RBI registration was coming about, where people weren't too keen, where I think people didn't quite understand the concept of it at first. And then once we've sort of all eased into it now, I think for the future, I know a lot of the providers like TTD, CAVE, the BSF will all be getting themselves prepared for the re-registration. So I think in the next couple of years, that will be a smoother process. I don't think it's going to be as much of a loss for the industry. And obviously, if we can keep bringing in some trainees, which will be ideal for the industry.
Absolutely, change is scary and it's challenging, isn't it? And the scale and the pace of that was a lot. So yes, we lost. We lost some good people, but there's plenty of other industries that have been through this process as well, and a similar thing has happened. But you're right; those schemes are sort of gearing up for the 2028, and again, it's not that far away. Don't. And I'm probably the biggest hypocrite here, but don't wait till last minute to start pulling together those, your portfolio of work and that sort of stuff. We should really be thinking about that now, and recording those interesting things that happen on a job. It's hard, isn't it, in 2 years' time to kind of recall some of those quirky, interesting things that have happened. So just jotting those down now, I think it's a really important thing to start doing.
It's easy said than done in our hectic day-to-day. But yeah,
it is. There's a lot to do, and I've heard the suggestion that the job is 50% admin now, but some of that admin, that recording, making decisions and those sorts of things is really, really important, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, those interesting, those problems, interesting construction technology, those sorts of things. I love this job. I think it's the best job in the world. We get to sit at a desk and look at plans and do some real techie stuff. We get to go out and meet people, look at some pretty cool buildings, that sort of stuff as well. I still enjoy. I don't do it enough, but I still enjoy getting my boots on and getting them dirty. I don't go out if it's raining, obviously, but this is the best job in the world, and kind of how we get that message out there. I think it's quite important.
That's
how
part
we kind of bring through the next generation.
Do you think this is part of rebuilding trust in construction, in the industry as a whole? And do you think that there needs to be some maybe cultural changes that needs to happen for that to be real?
Yeah, cultural change is a long, slow process, and I think it's fair to say construction has a bad rep. Cultural change. If you're going to force people to change because of the law, it's I don't think it's going to work long term. There's got to be a reason to sort of want to change that culture, hasn't there? So, and I go back to what I said earlier about creating an environment where, if you're doing the right thing, you thrive. Actually proving that you are a compliant contractor, economically should be good for you. Your client has to ensure the people they appoint to do the job are competent to do so. Actually, that cultural change, that sort of embedding this stuff, it being part of the everyday of what you do, should be rewarding, both in terms of the products you deliver at the end, beautiful, safe buildings, but you should be successful in doing that as well. So, I don't think just forcing people to do it is the right thing, but construction is construction's an oil tanker, isn't it? It takes a long time to turn around. And we've seen some of the wrinkles, the challenges, around high risk buildings, and that the really rigid regime that's in place, and sort of what's happened with the flow, of new buildings coming to the market and those sorts of things through that process. And it's absolutely the right thing to do. But yeah, it's a process that will develop.
What unintended consequences should we be most cautious about with this large-scale regulatory reforms happening around us?
Yeah, I mean I go back to what I said about the sort of the 6 stressors. The risk here on there's still change happening, a lot of change, volume, pace, as well as having to do the day job and everything else. That we don't always throw our toys out of the pram, but that's the wrong word. But we get fatigue, and we end up people leaving the industry because they don't feel valued, they don't feel they've got the support that they need. And part of that is around leadership in the industry, and just talking to the building inspector profession. I believe we need to collaborate more, across public and private, because ultimately we're building inspectors. We do the same thing. Okay, we've got slightly different frameworks and different ways of doing it, but ultimately, we're delivering public safety. People live, work, get treated when they're ill in the buildings that we work on. And that's something we need to be really proud of. And I don't think it's not impossible for us to start collaborating more across the piece. And I guess that was the thoughts behind the sort of Association of Registered Building Inspectors, really, was about the power dynamic shift. We spoke about the responsibilities and accountabilities of individual building inspectors. But okay, there's a lot of responsibility, but there's a fair bit of power that comes with that as well. A decision can't be made by an organisation anymore without taking the advice of that building inspector. That's quite powerful. And collectively as professionals, I think we can do some really good stuff.
Do you think with the introduction of a single regulator that could rebuild some confidence and put people a bit more at ease and a bit less uncertain of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a public perception piece, there's a rebuilding trust here, isn't there? And we have to be seen to do the right thing. It's complex. The proof will be, the rhetoric is fine, isn't it? The direction of travel, we can all see where we're going and where we've been going for a number of years. It's when we start to see the results of that, I guess. And sometimes, I mean, as RBIs, we're sort of trained to spot fault with things, aren't we? That's our job. You kind of pick out a drawing and it's spot the difference. What's wrong with this? You go on site, you're looking for the bad. And I think sometimes we don't celebrate the good enough. We can tend to be quite negative and kind of dwell on the bad things, but there's plenty of really good stuff. And the conversations we're having now, the conversations that you guys will have every day, on site. Building control is important. It's up the agenda. We're having those conversations. I think that's a really positive thing.
Do you think there's going to be some more stabilization in certain areas, or do you think there are still some big changes to be put around to maybe make things a bit more defined?
We're learning, aren't we? The big changes I think have happened in building control, and touch wood, because obviously the building control independent panel need to put their report out. But I think it's going to have to be more around sort of how do we make what we do more efficient. There's plenty of tweaking around the edges we can do to make it more efficient, smoother, to kind of support that collaboration between the two regimes in local and private, the passing of work between one another and that sort of thing as well. So from a stabilization point of view, it's never going to be business as usual. Stuff's always going to change, kind of guidance will always change, we've got the homes standard, changes in Part L to come. And I am guilty of getting a bit focused on Part B and fire because that's the stuff I really enjoy. But there's plenty of other stuff out there as well. So we're pretty good at it from a building inspector's point of view. And it's what keeps the job interesting. It's an exciting time to be doing what we're doing, I think.
Jon, it's been brilliant having you come on our podcast. And one of our final questions would be, what message would you want RBIs and building control professionals listening to this to take away about where the system is heading?
Right. Okay. So I've worn my Christmas jumper today, so this feels like my sort of Christmas Day message, doesn't it? Which I really should have prepared. Where we're heading, I think we're kind of at the start of that journey, aren't we? We've all got registered. Value that registration as well. It does mean something. I go back to my message about the built environment being really, really important. The society falls apart without critical national infrastructure, without that built environment. It is everything. We play a vital part in that. So my message would be, we've established the baseline. We've got a responsibility to step up and maintain that baseline, to maintain that, that public trust in what we do. Let's talk. Let's come together. That's a brilliant thing. I've had more conversations with building inspectors across the piece in the last few years than I've ever had, and that's great that we're talking, that we're collaborating. So my message, in a sentence, would be: don't give up. Kind of, we need to be here for each other. I think we're going to see better leadership in the industry. From the little bits I'm involved with the ICC and the the Association of Registered Building Inspectors. ARBI's got some interesting stuff to happen next year as well, so I'm really excited about that. So I am quite positive. So as a message, that was really disjointed and unclear and very rambly. But somewhere in there will be a message that someone can pick out for me. I'm going to stop talking.
A solid message from Jon to finish. Stay positive.
Stay positive. Don't give up. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think
brilliant.
That resonates with the industry for us at the minute. We just need to keep pushing forward and just have to adapt with what's going on. I hope we all love what we do, and sometimes we have to make a few sacrifices to, crack on with it. But Jon,
yeah, and get involved, because everybody's voice is important.
Well, that's it. That's what we wanted the podcast, isn't it, Nader? We wanted to give people the voice to talk about what they've been doing and how
Absolutely.
they feel.
Absolutely, that's the whole point of it. It's just as many people as we can to have them come on here and share their knowledge and experience. I think in the last episodes that are released, we have a combined maybe 100 years combined experience and knowledge between the four people that.
Yeah, and I'm terribly sorry to break your run of really professional, coherent speakers.
It's very professional.
So
no, it's been brilliant, Jon, and thank you obviously for making the time and taking the time to speak to us and obviously share as much as you could. It's really greatly appreciated, and
yeah. No, thank you guys. A pleasure.
Thank you.
This episode of Behind the Regs is sponsored by Plan Checker. Plan Checker is a UK-based digital platform designed to connect clients with verified building control and construction professionals, making it easier to find the right expertise at the right time for the right job. It doesn't replace building control bodies, and it doesn't carry out restricted activities or functions. It simply creates clearer, more transparent access to the professionals working across the industry. If you're a professional, a client, or part of the wider built environment sector, you can learn more or sign up at planchecker.co.uk.